Okay, this morning is, I don't know if you'd call this a rant or just a complaint or just a warning regarding crimp connectors and the discrepancies in what they're supposed to, the wires they're supposed to be able to handle and the wires they can actually handle. What brought this on was when I was installing a stereo in my truck a couple weeks ago, a month ago, and the wire size that I had was, I think it was like 16 gauge, might have been 18 gauge, and I couldn't crimp them with the blue connectors. The blue connectors wouldn't crimp properly. So I went with the red ones, and the red ones are rated, or they claim that they can handle 22 to 16 gauge. And what that means is that supposedly they can handle wire size between 0.0253 and 0.051. Now the numbers for these gauges are for single strand solid wire. But what I found was that number one, some of these seem to be about correct, but others were just completely wrong. This connector right here, we're gonna zoom in here, this is an old insulated crimp connector. It says on it in writing that's really small, 16 to 22 gauge. And I don't know if you can see that. You can look inside, you can see the size of the hole. So I've got a wire gauge, and we've got 16, and let's see, which of these is 16? I've got a set of every size drill bit, and so this is just a little bit bigger than 16. And you put it in here, and it fits, seems to have a lot of space. So what I did was I just started trying to find out what size this would actually, the maximum it would take. And what I found was that this would actually go up to 14 gauge solid wire. And that's fine. But the problem is that the closer you get to the smaller size, the closer you get to 22 gauge, the harder this is, it's going to be to crimp. It just really probably won't do it. I've found that in a lot of cases, to get a good crimp, even with a pair of ratcheting crimpers, that you oftentimes have to double up the wire. And what does that mean? You cut twice the length of the wire you need, fold it in half and put it in, and then maybe it'll crimp correctly. But here's where the problem came in. These were butt connectors that I bought just before I went to put the stereo in. And you can see in there's a huge discrepancy in the size of that piece of metal in there. In fact, this is a piece of 12 gauge wire, and it easily goes in there. The size discrepancy is such that it actually will accept a wire that's 10 gauge solid single strand wire. This is not made correctly. This is a blue butt connector. This is an old one, and a lot of times you can tell the older ones because when you look down here, you'll see that these are just a straight metal tube, whereas these will be flared out. They actually took the time to make them a little bit flared out so that it was easier to get the wire in. But even with these, this is supposed to be a maximum of 14 gauge, and this wire is swimming in it. This is a 12 gauge. This is going up to, 12 gauge. So the maximum, this crimp connector will take a 10 gauge single strand wire. That's what these are supposed to take. This is the yellow connector, and it's supposed to be 10 to 12 gauge. Well, once again, this is 12 gauge wire and it's swimming. So we put in this size, and this drill bit seems to be reasonably snug, but that's 8 gauge. So this actually can handle 8 gauge single strand wire. Here's another connector. This is an old one. Same thing, 8 gauge wire. Here's another blue connector, supposed to be 14. Easily takes a 12 gauge. Now, I think one of the reasons for this, and in this case this is just shoddy, crappy, cheap Chinesium workmanship. Someone didn't care and they just used the same exact tube as the blue ones. But in the case of these old style ones, this one is from, some stuff going back to the 80s. I found this in a parts bin from someone who had passed away in 1981, and so it was pre-1981. And this one is closer to correct. But I think I figured out what's going on here, and well, for the ones that aren't shoddy. I recently looked up wire sizes for stranded wire, and I was kind of surprised at what I found. That from one manufacturer alone, depending on the type of stranded copper wire or stranded wire you bought, the size for 16 gauge wire ranged from 0.050, which is 16 gauge, all the way up to, and I'm looking off screen here, all the way up to 0.071, which is 13 gauge. And I'm guessing maybe some of the older manufacturers knew this, and that's why that they can go up to much higher strand count, or much higher size wires. And then, so in 14 gauge, the same thing. 14 gauge solid wire, 0.064, right here, 0.064. But then this manufacturer that I'm looking at off screen has wire that's 14 gauge that's as big as 0.902. 0.9. So that's close to 12 gauge. And then it's the same thing for 12. The size goes from 0.102, which on here is 10 gauge, all the way up to 0.104, and their 10 gauge stranded wire is 128 to 134. That's 8 gauge for solid wire. So that's kind of aggravating and irritating, because when you're trying to use these crimp connectors, you know, there's a lot of argument on the internet about whether you should solder them, whether you should only crimp them. Some people have given up. I used to be on the solder camp. I've been trying to do crimping, and like I said, I've been running into all sorts of issues with the crimps not being correct. Then, to make matters even more annoying and confusing, I found out one of the reasons. Recently I was trying to crimp a bunch of stuff and was having some problems, and found out that I have several of these crimpers. I keep one in my shed, and I keep one in the house, so I don't have to keep carting them around. They're relatively expensive. These are actually Harbor Freight crimpers with iWis jaws. The Harbor Freight dies they have a rounded edge here, and they don't crimp these very good at all. These flat ones seem to work better, but I noticed a problem with my crimps, and then I found out that in the case of this one, the die was too far down. So when I was crimping it down all the way, it wasn't compressing completely, and I had to put in, let me see here, I had to put a brass shim in here. It was like 16th inch brass. I had to cut it out and put it in here, and now it fully closes. This one seems to be fine, not a problem. So yeah, that's kind of it. This is just a little bit of a caveat when you use crimpers. The things you got to keep in mind, that these really are not for the sizes they say, unless you do some cheating. I thought maybe if I recommended higher quality ones, these ones with the stepped edge are generally higher quality manufactured ones, and you can tell that by looking at how they are inside. But even they are not quite accurate. They're just better. So what I would recommend is, if you're going to buy these, you find a supplier that sells the ones that have a stepped edge in here. You can actually feel it. When they usually illustrate it, they show pictures, and it's a straight edge, whereas these are a rounded edge on the step here between the crimp part and the sleeve. You can't find that with these. These are always going to look like this. I've not seen any that are stepped, but you can find them with some of the blue ones, like these. This three-way connector is an example of what you're looking for. Stepped edge. These yellow ones, these are going to be a higher quality than the other ones. I'll put the name of a company that I think, I've not actually purchased anything from them yet, but I believe that the company they supply the stepped edge ones, and so the next time I need some of these, I'm gonna order some from them. But I'll put the name of that company at the bottom of the screen. So anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching.